Chapter 36, Berserker. My tail. My tail. My tail. My tail. My fucking tail. Boom. A huge pressure exploded from Broly's interior, sending everything that was around him flying: stones, rocks, trees, sand, people around him. That pressure affected Frost and Hit, and they fought against her to not be dragged. Even the enormous structure of Kaioshin staggered for a few seconds. Broly unleashed a huge power, out of control. Frost, protecting himself from the strong wind that was being created around Broly, said, "Now what happens? Wasn't he supposed to be half dead?" Hit, equally surprised by this situation, while resisting the energy pressure, thought, "What enormous power. After losing that transformation, it appears that he has become stronger. How is it possible?" But that wasn't the last surprise for Hit. Not only gravity returned to normal, he also noticed that the parts that had disappeared from his body were slowly returning to their place. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm glad it happened." Broly had lost control of his emotions because of the anger, and not only his emotions, but also his abilities. Broly had lost control of his emotions because of the anger, and not only his emotions, but also his abilities. He had stopped concentrating his formless realm, and at the same time he was using surrender intermittently, which helped Hit recover the parts of your body without too much effort. For first time since he was born, the quiet Broly felt anger, and in an overwhelming way, he completely lost the great control he had worked on until now, including his abilities. He just kept expelling power at the same time he was been swallowed up by a fury that kept growing uncontrollably. Ah! While Broly was still expelling energy, one of the Scion approached Frost. "Lord Frost, we are not very sure, but we believe that child can be a kind of Scion. Centuries ago the Scions had a tail, just like the one you just cut. When we looked at the full moon we were able to become giant monkeys, multiplying 10 times our power. We believe that there may be some relationship with what has just happened." Frost, as bewildered as before, said, "And what is supposed to be happening now? Is this something that the Scions also do or did in history?" The Scion, trying to resist the pressure, told Frost, "I don't know, sir. There is nothing in the history of the planet Sadala that speaks about a Scion with 3 eyes, although..." "Although what?" Frost asked, irritated. Although before the conversation went on, that pressure stopped. Broly, with his 3 yellow eyes, green aura, swollen veins and mad face without control, stopped to release power and looked at Frost. The target of his anger. Frost made eye contact with him, and as he increased his guard, he said in a sad way, "Shit." Broly accelerated toward him. "Ah!" As fast as lightning, Broly arrived at his position, and with a single punch, he threw him to dozens of kilometers, creating a sonic explosion that threw all those around him as if they were leaves caught in a gust of wind. Frost, after flying several kilometers, landed on the ground, and by the speed that had reached due to the punch of Broly, as if it were a stone thrown in the water, took several cartwheels on the ground until he could stop, although not for his own volition. Ag. Frost said, embedded in the floor, vomiting and trying to get up, but... Broly appeared before him, creating an earthquake upon landing. Boom! Instantly he grabbed Frost, who was still on his back, to the ground trying to get up, and while he was still grabbing his head, he dragged him at full speed across the floor. Broly was sanding Frost's face against the ground, without Frost could do anything to avoid it. Ahahaha! Frost shouted like a scared child about to faint on a roller coaster. When Broly got tired of sanding his face to the ground, still holding him by the head, grabbed him in the air and squeezed him with both hands. He was trying to squeeze his head like an orange. Damn! Die! Frost, trying to draw strength from where he could, at close range he started throwing all kinds of energy attacks on Broly, impacting and exploding all against his face. Broly's grip was becoming less powerful, he was beginning to loosen up. Therefore, Frost thought his attacks had taken effect, but when smoke caused by his gusts of ki dissipated, he saw that Broly was perfectly fine. All he had achieved was to make him more furious. Frost's bloody face showed great terror. Impossible. Broly brutally kicked Frost's belly. Yuh! Frost's body was deformed by the impact and went flying through the air, but before he went several miles away like he did before, Broly grabbed him by the tail. Due to the great acceleration caused by the impact of Broly and the sudden grip of the tail, it was almost torn. Broly, without letting Frost even have time to scream, he spun him using his tail. As if it were a hammer-throwing competition, Broly spun Frost from his tail, and when he reached his maximum speed, he threw him once more tens of kilometers away, in the direction of the Kaioshin dome. Frost had become nothing more than a doll in the hands of Broly, a doll that could be destroyed at any moment with great ease. Although Frost trained seriously for more than a month to increase his powers, almost tripling them after the battle against Broly, everything was useless, he could not do anything. It was impossible for him to do anything to that unstoppable destruction machine, which had not killed him yet due to the great resistance of Frost Demon, a great resistance that allowed them to be alive and move despite having practically all his body shattered or cut in half. Also, because of the mental disorder he was having, he wasn't hitting efficiently on vital points. Frost was unable to beat Broly in Super Saiyan state, and every second his power increased more and more. That's right, the Broly with the black hair and yellow eyes of the film is his Super Saiyan state. In the transformation of Super Saiyan, the hair becomes golden blonde in color and seems to stand on end, giving it a rising, flame-like appearance, because the S cells release a yellow color energy. When the S cells of the Saiyans are released, they release too much energy, so they overload the body with that energy, then that surplus and uncontrolled energy begins to be released through the hair so it doesn't harm the body. It is as if the Saiyan's hair were a safety valve that prevents the body from exploding due to an overload of energy. However, what would happen if the body of the legendary Super Saiyan was so strong and adapted so well to the energy that it wasn't necessary for his hair to act as a safety valve? This is what happened with Broly right now. He was transformed into Super Saiyan, however his hair still maintained its natural color, although a little more bristly, being the only notable physical change the color of his eyes, which became yellow, the color of the energy released by the cells S. However, not only his body was special, his S cells were special too. While a Super Saiyan 1 has a multiplier of 50. Broly seemed to have started with 150, but that wasn't all. It didn't stay in a stable 150 or was losing power over time, the multiplier increased every second, in the same way that anger did, the anger, the trigger for the transformation of Super Saiyan. The increase in power was exponential, in the same way as the anger that fed him. This was the reason for the appearance of this phase, the reason for his power, and the reason for his mental state. This was the ordinary Super Saiyan phase of Broly, the wrathful Super Saiyan. Frost was still flying uncontrollably towards the Great Dome of Kaioshin. It was only a matter of seconds before he crashed into it. Lord Frost. Two of his guards rushed towards Frost, who was about to crash, and using all his strength they tried to stop him, before he crashed into the Kaioshin tough structure. Boom! Thanks to the intervention of the two guards, Frost didn't hit the Kaioshin, falling to the ground a few seconds before, cushioned to some extent by the body of his subordinates. Frost, with the help of the people in that area, managed to get up and asked, "What the hell is happening? What the hell is that monster? Why he's getting stronger every second?" Before, when we were fighting, he used a technique that covered him with a red aura to increase his powers, but now this is different. His power increases every second, now it's even stronger than when he fought against me, but it's like he's in a berserker state. As if he were a beast that only thinks about destroying, when before he was a brilliant strategist, said Hit, who was meditating and consuming medicines to try to recover his energies and to heal the few wounds he had suffered in the battle against Broly. Hit observed and pointed out how in the distance several mountains were destroyed by Broly's indiscriminate attacks against everything around him. Everyone present looked at Hit, the legendary Hit Man, feeling somewhat intimidated by his presence. Hit. Renso, watching the wake of destruction that Broly had left, thought and said, if he had a tail, his transformation was similar to that an ape that increased his power 10 times, now his power increases constantly and is on rampage. Maybe he's the Saiyan of the legend. One of the Saiyans who was next to Renso said, the legendary Super Saiyan. You mean that demonic Saiyan that only shows up once every 1,000 years? Renso nodded and said, that's right, the legendary Super Saiyan. Once they awaken, it's all over, their power keeps growing, and they rampage until they basically self-destruct. Frost, who seemed to have heard something extremely interesting and pleasing to his ear, said, I haven't understood very well about that legend, but, are you saying that we just need to wait until he die? Renso was about to answer, but, I'm afraid it's not as simple as it seems, said a Saiyan that had just arrived at high speed, accompanied by a squad of other Saiyans. That Saiyan was dressed in a different armor from the others, each step he took showed power and his voice conveyed pride and dignity. All the Saiyans, upon hearing his voice, knelt down and said, King Sadala. The King Sadala, without wasting time, said, it is not time for formalities. I already know the situation, there is no doubt that we are facing the legendary Super Saiyan. That is why we must prevent him from self-destructing. If he were to explode, he can destroy planet Sadala and all the planets around him. We have to stop him or it will be the end of our solar system, maybe even part of the galaxy will be destroyed. Hearing the words of King Sadala, everyone panicked, even those who thought to flee like Frost changed their minds. They didn't know if what King Sadala said was true. Perhaps he had exaggerated so that all collaborated to stop the destruction of planet Sadala in the hands of Broly. However, if he were right, it would be his end even if they tried to run away. Damn, if I want to keep my hero image, not die in the explosion and kill Broly, I have no choice but to fight. Frost turned to Hit and asked, "Hey Hit, are you able to beat that monster?" Hit, who was still meditating, opened his eyes slightly and said, "If I recover my energies and he continues to be a beast without control or intelligence, even though his power is increasing, yes, it is likely that I can defeat him." King Sadala, hearing the words of Hit and the idea of Frost, assented and said, "Give all the help you can to Hit to recover. The others will try to stop that Broly and buy time." When saying those words, everything returned to the tranquility. There was no sign of the rumblings, destruction, and earthquakes that Broly was provoking with his attacks. Everyone looked in the direction where the destruction had originated and some asked, "Has he calmed down?" However, Frost, Hit and King Sadala said, "No, he's coming." Ah. Chapter 37, Danger. "No, he's coming." Ah. "Prepare to attack," said King Sadala all his troops, which began to charge energy in their hands. Frost, following the example of King Sadala, ordered his troops to do the same. "Quick, prepare to attack too." Broly continued advancing towards them in a violent way, destroying everything around him. "Now!" Frost and King Sadala shouted. Thousands of energy attacks were launched at the same time from all directions, impacting against Broly. Blam! The union of all those energy attacks at a single point created an explosion which left a mushroom-shaped smoke. That combined attack was powerful enough to destroy 20 Sadala plants. But it was useless. Ah! Broly, who was perfectly fine, and more furious than before, counterattacked. Broly began to concentrate energy around his body, creating a kind of protective barrier. The attacks stopped coming to Broly's body, they all vanished when they touched that barrier, but this barrier wasn't created for defensive purposes. The barrier that surrounded him, as if it were a fragmentation grenade, exploded and fragments flew around, impacting everything that was around him. Boom! Bomb! Bomb! Some hit the ground, others against the mountains, others against mountains, others against the warriors who were attacking Broly. However, they all had something in common. When those energy attacks reached them, they didn't die or were destroyed. They disappeared totally or partially, devoured by a green energy. "What the hell is going on?" said a horrified Saiyan who watched as two of his friends, who were hit by a green energy sphere in the head, disappeared. "I'm disappearing." "Hitch," said one of the aliens in Frost's army, who was hit in the arm by an energy sphere and watched helplessly as his body was devoured from the arm. "The ground is disappearing," some warriors said, pointing the ground, which also was being devoured by a strange green energy. "I don't want to go, King Sadala. I don't want to go, please, I don't want to go," said one of the guards of King Sadala, who was hit in the back trying to stop one of the spheres directed to his king, and now he was disappearing slowly in front of the person he had protected. King Sadala, horrified and bewildered in equal parts while still preparing an energy attack beyond his limits, asked Frost, "What the hell did he just do? Where is everything that energy devours?" Frost, next to King Sadala, loading all his energy into a giant sphere, answered, "How do you want me to know? It's the first time I see this ability directly. Ask Hit, he is the only one who has suffered that skill and is still among us." Hit, on the other hand, while meditating, observed the chaos around him. He's using that skill again. Has he regained his consciousness? Or is he using it unconsciously? No, he's not protecting himself, must be unconsciously. Frost and King Sadala, seeing that the coordinated attack had failed and that Broly was about to move again, they released their definitive techniques. Frost launched his energy sphere towards Broly, which without much effort grabbed it with his bare hands and put it on top of his head, like if this was his war trophy. King Sadala at that time launched an attack very similar to Garlic Cannon towards Broly. That attack completely covered Broly's body, which was still holding Frost's energy sphere, but Now, with a movement of Frost's hand, the giant energy sphere detonated above Broly's head, causing a titanic explosion. Boom! After that explosion, all the remaining warriors had the courage to continue fighting, just as their leaders launched energy attacks on Broly. None of them could believe that Broly would remain alive after receiving so many lethal explosions directly in his body. But... Aya! With that war cry, all attacks dissipated, as if they were simple spits in front of a hurricane. Once again, a great pressure was unleashed on the entire planet. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tidal waves, seemed to be the end of the world. And at the origin of that cataclysm, there was Broly, who was undergoing another transformation. His muscles were swelling, his hair bristling and his size increasing, going from the body of a child who barely reaches a meter, to a height of 1.80. However, it wasn't just a change of appearance, the most important thing was his increase in power. The body of the Scions adapt to power, the clear example of that is the Super Saiyan 3rd grade. The Super Saiyan 3rd grade has a multiplier of x500, a power multiplier superior to the Super Saiyan 3. In this transformation, the Super Saiyan increases his power beyond his control, overloading the body with that power, increasing the muscles in an exaggerated way as a side effect. Despite the increase in physical strength, the excess of muscles means a decrease in speed and coordination, in addition to an important energy expenditure. However, even with this inconveniences, if it weren't for the adaptive capacity to the power of Saiyan bodies, it wouldn't be possible to carry out such an action. However, what about the adaptive capacity of the legendary Super Saiyan? The S cells of the legendary Super Saiyan increase his power every second, but, reaching a certain point, the body will contain more power than can control and support. In that moment there will be a transformation very similar to the Super Saiyan 3rd grade, increasing the muscles due to the excess of power. However, the adaptive capacity of the legendary Super Saiyan is so great that it not only increases the musculature, it also increases the size of the body, making it grow in a proportional way. In that way the power increased without compromising the speed. This is the Broly Super Saiyan full power, with a multiplier of 1.500. Hit stopped his meditation, because he was overwhelmed by what he felt. His power is even superior to mine when I exceed my limits. And now what is this? Asked Frost, who was tired of so many transformations and power increases. King Sadala, with fear, looked at Broly and said to himself, is this the end of planet Sadala? However, they weren't the only ones who were fascinated and terrified by his power. Fuwa and Fit, after Broly's joke, continued fighting for days. After resting and healing, they returned to fight again, not only for the joke, they had taken advantage of this occasion to recriminate everything that had not been said so far. That's how they took several weeks. In one of his constant breaks between fight and fight, Fuwa and Fit noticed a great energy at a point away from the universe. An energy so exaggeratedly powerful that even reached the sacred world of the Kai. Faced with this strange and possibly catastrophic event, Fuwa and Fit left their differences aside and decided to do their job. What the hell is this? Is this the energy of a mortal? Fuwa said with cold sweat on his forehead, because it was a power that was beyond his limits. How is it possible that a mortal has so much power that we can even feel it in this place? Said Fit, who was just as surprised as Fuwa. Both ran to the crystal ball with which they spied places of the universe and focused on the area where that energy came from. On the planet Sadala. Fuwa and Fit watched the battle that was happening, and after observing the display of power that Broly was unleashing, they despaired. This is impossible, it's something different, but there's no doubt, it's that subject of 1,000 years ago, Fuwa said while recalling past catastrophic events. 1,000 years? You mean? Said Fit, who had understood the reference. Yes, that guy. Thousands of years ago, when the Scion were still savages and fought against everyone who crossed their path, a Scion went to a planet to conquer it. Due to the power of the natives and the beating he was suffering, that Scion went into rampage, something very similar to what is happening now. His power increased more and more until he exploded, destroying several solar systems full of life. Dozens of civilizations were lost that day in that accident, Fuwa said as he watched the battle, scared by how similar the current situation was with the previous one. What can we do, Supreme Kai? We have to stop him in some way, Fit said as he continued to watch the crystal ball, with too much fear. I know, Fit, but I doubt we can do anything against him, his power is too much above us. We will only die in vain, said Fuwa, who was even more scared than Fit. But if we don't do something, it is very likely that the tragedy will repeat itself, and this time it may be worse, said Fit, who tried to make his superior sacrifice himself for the universe. He didn't forgive the joke of a few days ago. There's only one thing we can do, we have to warn him. Fuwa said, not knowing if he was making the right decision. To that person. Are you sure it will not make things worse? Asked Fit, who was concerned about the Grand Kai's decision. I understand and share your concerns, but there is nothing else we can do. Besides, is his job, said Fuwa while using the same crystal ball to send a message. On a planet with the shape of an inverted pyramid. A beautiful woman with white hair, slightly blue skin and slightly silver eyes was cooking healthy food, when suddenly the staff that was leaning against the wall began to make intermittent sounds and brightness. That woman left what she was doing and walked slowly towards her staff. I guess it will be the Kais. They should want Champa-sama to do his job for once. After checking his staff, he found that she was right, since she had also felt that titanic and strange mortal key, and she was right. Champa-sama, you finally have work to do. We have to leave, Vado said as she made his way to the dining room, where Champa was eating a large amount of high-caloric food. Work you said? Asked the god of destruction Champa with his mouth full. That's right, the Supreme Kai requires your help to prevent what he has called a galactic catastrophe. It seems that there is a mortal out of control and about to explode according to his words, Vado said while showing him by his staff the current and past images of the planet Sadala and the battle that was taking place. Champa, still eating, said in his usual mood, How annoying. Tell that bum that I'll go there once finish my dessert, and continued eating, but a little slower than before. When suddenly, grow. The belly of Champa produced strange sounds. Champa grabbed his belly, and while he was writhing with his face red and with cold sweat on his forehead, he flew quickly to a certain place in the mansion while shouting, Toilet. Toilet. Vado sighed by the disappointment she felt towards the god she was attending and said, okay. While Champa was still indisposed, she continued to watch the fight, which she found quite interesting, to find a mortal capable of extracting so much power, such strange abilities, and for another reason. Who is this child? I am not able to find his origin. Because of the great power that Broly had released and the transformation he had shown. Hit stopped meditating and moved to where Frost and King Sadala were. King Sadala turned to Hit, and with a little more confidence asked, have you been able to recover your energies? Hit, without taking his eyes off Broly, said, I haven't managed to recover them all, but I'm afraid there's no time to rest. Chapter 39, Full Power. I think we have arrived a little late, Champa-sama, said Vados. Champa, scratching an ear and pulling out his belly, said moody, I had an emergency. An emergency. I repeated it several times along the way. If you ate properly you wouldn't have those emergencies, Vados answered, feigning a certain sadness by the fact that Champa didn't eat the healthy food she prepared for him. Champa stopped arguing, since Vados had some reason, and looked around. Everything was very strange to him, especially the extremely tall and muscular blonde boy who was relatively close to him. Hey Vados. Didn't you tell me there was a problem with a crazed scion? That guy is crazy, clearly, but since when scions have 3 eyes and blonde hair? Are you sure he's the same guy the Kais told us about? Champa said as he pointed at Broly, who seemed not to pay attention to them as he made more things disappear by throwing jets of energy attacks in all directions. Vados once again reviewed his staff and said, yes, I'm sure, I don't know why he has 3 eyes, but there's no doubt that he's the mutant scion that the Kais have told us about. It's supposed that whether he explodes or goes free from here, he could be a threat for the universe, although all this is very strange. Champa with his usual impulsive attitude, who cares? I'll finish him before the snack time. That brainless guy seems pretty strong. Stronger than many gods. What a great idea. I'll do a little sport with him. It's said that after doing some exercise the food tastes better. And I need to do some sports. He said looking at his belly. Hey idiot. I'm here. Champa shouted in a childish way to alert Broly, looking at him with arrogance and some emotion. Murmured Broly, who seemed to have realized that someone was nearby, and was insulting him. Broly rushed towards the chubby god of destruction, while Vados was still standing in the distance, with a thoughtful face. Broly, shedding an intense green light around him, which replaced the usual yellow aura of the normal Super Saiyan, rushed violently towards Champa with a giant sphere of energy in each hand. They were two more powerful versions of the Automa Rasen Omega Blaster. Ah! Broly threw one of them to Champa, who with his hands behind his back, dodged it easily. While Broly approached with his other attack of energy in his hand, which pretended to explode directly against Champa, like a standard Rasengan. Champa, confident of his abilities, raised his hand to stop Broly's attack, as if it were a simple foam ball, but when the huge sphere of green energy contacted his hand, multiplied its size dozens of times, to have the size of a Genkidama. Despite the powerful attack that shook the entire planet when it hit its target, and Champa remained motionless, but with a face of disgust, significantly increased his power to reject and destroy that giant sphere of energy, with force and using his energy Hakai, destroyed the attack. Boom! Champa, holding Broly's hand, looked at his hand, and noticed that some of his fur had been ripped off and there was a small scratch on his palm. The god of destruction Plump Cat looked at Broly with a frown. Nothing bad for a mortal. But, it won't happen again, he said, something pissed, but with some emotion. Upon saying those words, he punched Broly on the belly, sending him flying several kilometers. Broly shook himself hard, the attack seemed to have taken effect, making him even more furious. Ah! While he was flying towards Champa at a speed hundreds of times greater than the sound, the green aura that covered him increased and began to detach in a rain of lightning that was going everywhere, but especially towards Champa. Bomb! Bomb! Boom! Bomb! However, Champa avoided them without too much difficulty. When Broly got to where his prey was, they both exchanged punches, which seemed to be deforming the space. Neither of them backed away, but it was evident that Champa had the advantage, even though he wasn't using all his power. Like his brother, he liked to enjoy a good fight from time to time, and it was exceedingly difficult for him to find someone who would be able to challenge him. Although he was more impatient and impulsive than his brother, raising his power faster and faster. Bomb! Champa's fist crashed into Broly's face, causing him to spit blood, but... Ah! Broly counterattacked, creating an explosion of energy around him, which exploded like an atomic bomb. The explosion was impressive, so much that made the Kais shiver with fear while they watched the battle from their crystal ball, pushed back Champa and even tousled Vados. That muscular idiot is excessively abusing energy attacks, Champa said, as he looked disdainfully at Broly, who was still wrapped in his own green energy. However, his power doesn't stop increasing. Vados said a little seriously. The legendary Super Saiyan Broly, as it was seen in the film, presents physical characteristics very similar to the normal Super Saiyan, but it is not a normal Super Saiyan, nor is its process. In his previous transformation, Broly had managed to cope his body with all the power of his mutant S cells. All the power that his body could maintain without overflowing, so his hair didn't need to act as a safety valve. But, after a new attack of anger superior to the previous one after having reached the limit of the previous phase, in the same way that the Super Saiyan 2 works, the legendary Super Saiyan have a new evolution. In this evolution, the power of the cell's S is increased, releasing the unlimited potential that until now, were only limited to the body. In this transformation the user's body continues to maintain the colossal size of the previous transformation, which was the limit that the body was able to release without exploding. Then the limit breaks without destroying the body, but because the amount of energy is greater than what he can support, the hair acts as a safety valve, adopting the same color as a normal SS. But unlike the normal Super Saiyan, his eyes weren't green, since his pupils disappeared by his berserker state, which doesn't distinguish between friends or enemies, due to rage. The color of his aura wasn't yellow, but of an intense green color with an almost solid density, which was released in titanic quantities, to free itself from the excess of power that cannot retain, creating indiscriminate energy attacks to all places. The multiplier of this transformation is 2.400 is equal to 1.500 plus 150 by 6, but only the initial phase, because the power keep increasing every second. King Sadala and his bodyguards kept advancing towards what they believed was the origin of the apocalypse. For every 100 meters that could advance, the explosions that originated hundreds of kilometers ago made them go back between 2 and 10 meters. They were too scared to imagine what kind of battle could be happening in that place, the consequences of that battle and what could happen to them if they approached. But, they couldn't do anything else, they had to follow their king. When they arrived, they found a strange woman with white hair and blue skin, who was watching quietly the most terrible battle they had ever seen. A fat purple cat, and a wild-looking muscular blonde young man were exchanging punches, and the space around him seemed to distort with every confrontation. What the hell is that? Is this blonde guy Broly? King Sadala said, trying to understand what was happening. The Scions were supposed to have black hair. Who is he fighting against? He's very strong, he may be able to stop that monster before his self-destruction, said one of the bodyguards. Vados was transported close to the Scions and told them with a smile, of course he is very strong. He's Champa, the god of destruction, the strongest person in this universe. I'll give you a little advice. If you want to stay alive, you better not advance much more. Oh, by the way, I don't think we should worry about Broly's self-destruction. King Sadala and the others trust the warnings to that strange woman. King Sadala and the others ignored the warnings to that strange woman. They weren't sure what was happening or who they were, but if she was able to be so close to that battle and be okay, she must be someone very strong. So, they continued to see the fight from a safe position, just as they had been advised. Fight which was in its climax. Champa had stopped his courtesy and attacked Broly more forcefully. It's almost time for a snack, let's finish with this bag of muscles. The god of the destruction of the universe 6 began to emit a purple aura and rushed at a speed close to the speed of light towards Broly and began to throw a rain of punches. They were so fast that it seemed that his arms didn't move. As if he had thousands of invisible hands that beat Broly from all directions. Take this. And this. And this. This happens to you for interrupting my desert time. Champa shouted crazily, in a rather childish and annoying way. Broly helplessly kept getting punched by those unstoppable and almost invisible hands. He was like a small child trapped inside a giant wave, unable to move freely, unable to breathe, not knowing where he was, or when that agony would end, nor in what form would it end. Until PF. Broly, to Champa's surprise, was able to stop one of his quick attacks, and grab his fist with force. Champa hadn't used all his strength yet, but these attacks weren't supposed to be something Broly could face, they were way above his level. How is this possible? His power is... While Broly was holding Champa by his hand, he couldn't look away from Broly, because what was happening in front of him was too disturbing to do so. King Sadala and his bodyguards watched Broly with his mouth wide open and his eyes coming out of their sockets. Even Vados showed a certain face of surprise. While the dense green aura that until now had been fired from his body periodically, disappeared. Broly's body and muscles were growing once again, becoming bigger and titanic with each second, while his blonde hair turned green, the same green color as the aura that he had previously released. Broly, who was originally barely a meter tall, now he was a 2.23 meter giant, and his power had reached quotas that not even a god of destruction could disregard. Broly had achieved his most characteristic transformation. The legendary Super Saiyan full power. This is crazy, despite having a mortal ki, only in raw power. It is at the level of some gods of destruction. Broly raised his huge arm to prepare a powerful punch. Champa as a precaution tried to get away from that furious mastodon, but Broly's punch was a lot faster than he thought. Before he knew it, he was right in front of his snout. Impossible, even with that increase in power, he soon be so quick. It is impossible. Boom! Broly punched Champa and sent him flying, until his plump silhouette was lost on the horizon. Broly shouted in celebration for his punch. Vado was the only one who noticed what had happened. Broly hadn't become faster, it was Champa who became slower. It was as if time had slowed a bit for him, while had been stopped completely for King Sadala and his companions. She was the only one not affected by that event, being able to appreciate it. And this time she was speechless. Time manipulation too. Seconds later, they both noticed an unidentified object flying towards their back. It was Champa, who due to the power of the impact had completely turned the world around. Until he was stopped by Vados, who for the first time intervened in the fight. At that moment, time returned to normal and Champa erupted in anger, his nose was bleeding. At that moment, time returned to normal. King Sadala and his bodyguards moved again and Champa erupted in anger, his nose was bleeding. Damn! Damn! I'm going to destroy you! Champa hysterically shouted, releasing a great amount of energy and thirst for blood, which made the blood of King Sadala and his companions freeze. However, before Champa could do anything, Vados stepped in front, something that greatly surprised Champa. He had never heard that an angel interfere in the work of the destroyer god, much less Vados. Vados turned to Champa to reassure him and explain the reason for his actions. Champa-sama, don't worry, you can do whatever you want, but before I would like to ask this boy some questions. Champa looked surprised and bewildered. He didn't understand what Vados intended, nor how he intended to achieve it. This jumble of muscles was only capable of destroying and screaming, nothing more. Ask something. It is impossible to dialogue with him. He is the legendary Super Saiyan, he has lost all reason, he will only destroy everything in his path until he explodes and kills us all. We have to stop him by force, it is useless to dialogue with him, said King Sadala, trying to warn Vados of the danger they were facing and how useless their actions were. Vados, with a slight smile, went towards the green giant Broly, and Broly received her with his usual sound. While releasing more power in a violent way. But Vados, without flinching, asked in a mocking tone, tell me. How long are you going to pretend to be a berserker who only knows how to shout and fight? Yeesh! Everyone present exclaimed at once. Even Champa was shocked by the question and what lay behind it. Everyone looked at the furious, wild, crazy and giant Broly and, they practically dropped their jaws to the ground. Although his eyes were still blank, seemed to be covered by an armor of rocky muscles and his wild and uncontrolled appearance. In a roguish way he said, adopting more social and cocky stance. Ha ha ha. Sorry XD. Since when did you notice it, Miss Vados? Chapter 40, Why? What? Ha ha ha. Sorry. Since when did you notice it, Miss Vados? Wait. They all shouted at the same time, although King Sadala was the most scandalous with his reaction, even more than Champa, which is a great challenge. Even the Kais who watched everything that happened from their crystal ball fell from their asses to the ground. However, Vados ignored them and continued with the conversation. I suspected when I was watching you from my staff. When you were fighting against Frost, Hit and King Sadala. But I could assure myself until I saw you fight against Champa-sama. Broly crossed his arms and said, I understand what you mean. Only someone as strong as Champa could force me to get out of my brainless beast role. Vados, happy that he had understood without needing to explain it, replied, exactly, although you are a good enough actor. There were certain moments in which you clearly resorted to strategies and difficult techniques, not to mention the ability to manipulate time. It requires more than just muscles to use such a skill, any minimally attentive person would realize that, she said while sending a hint to Champa. Broly with a shy smile said, oh. Thanks for the advice, I will keep it in mind for future occasions. Except for Vados, everyone else seemed to be suffering a mental collapse. All this was too much to assimilate, too surreal, too crazy, too absurd. Vados politely responded with pleasure, because she could rarely speak with someone moderately intelligent since she became Champa's nanny. No, I really have to thank you. If it hadn't been for you, I'm afraid Champa-sama wouldn't have moved out of his chair in decades. Ha ha ha, Off laughed at the same time. Champa, feeling humiliated, was about to go into a rage, but someone interrupted him. Why? Why did you pretend to be in the berserker state? Why have you done all this? All this destruction? Why? Answer. King Sadala said with great indignation and bloodshot eyes. Champa would normally have destroyed that mortal for interrupting him, but this time he made an exception, since the question also intrigued him. You're right. You're right. Why did you do that? Why did you cheat us all from the beginning? Champa said, trying not to lose prominence. Broly, due to popular pressure, and just like the villain in the 007 films, he explained his evil plan. Well, if you are so anxious to know, I guess I'll have to explain it. I wasn't pretending all the time, there were a few seconds that I really become berserker. When the weeping Frost cut my tail, I get angry for the first time in my life. That also caused my powers to awaken, powers that increased due to my anger, and at the same time my rage increased by those powers, creating a vicious circle that caused me to become completely berserker, despite how calm and peaceful I am. I was completely out of control, but thanks to beating a certain person who cut my beautiful tail, my anger began to subside due to the pleasure that all Saiyan feel when beat a frost demon. Although it wasn't until I received some frost attacks on my face that I could cool my head. Frost and cool, do you catch the word game? He tried to make a joke, so that those who were still stunned could relax. Champa, who is too impatient, had to interrupt. One moment. Just a moment. Why did you do that? Broly, frustrated by the little success of his joke and the interruption, said, I was about to explain that part, have a little patience. After regaining my consciousness thanks to my innate ability to control my own mind almost perfectly, I threw Frost away so he wouldn't get in the way while I was trying to get used to my new transformation. During that time when you were uselessly making plans against me, I was, among other things, preparing my new skill, which you have been able to witness recently. Get used to my anger, how to control and focus it, understand the changes in my body and learn to control my incredible power. And as you can see, it went very well in everything, but I wanted more. I wanted to increase my powers faster. Of course, there's no better way for someone like me to get that fighting. Therefore, I took advantage of the fact that there were 2 armies and a legendary assassin who came exclusively for me to do my experiments. To improve the success of my plan, I induced myself in a controlled berserker state, which would help me achieve more anger, adrenaline, and brutality. I needed to understand that feeling to make it totally mine, not just make it part of my. As if I were an actor trying to get inside his role, in an excessively immersive way. It was a great plan. Among other things, I would quickly increase my power by being hit and hitting anything that came near me. I would end up with the 2 extraordinary people who tried to kill me. Also, to spend an extremely fun moment. Fun? King Sadala asked, furious and discouraged. Everything he was hearing was hurting his pride, as if, from the beginning, he had been playing with him and all his people. Broly, with a big smile and arrogantly, said, yes, acting like a brainless beast was extremely funny. I always fight with strategies and with elaborate techniques. It has been refreshing to do the opposite for a change. Also, see your faces of amazement, fear and despair while you tried to stop me with everything you had or fled, without being able to do anything to avoid it, has been orgasmic. A whole universe against a single person, against an unstoppable power without control, a battle in which there was never hope, it's almost poetic. I congratulate you, you have entertained me quite well and the result has been more or less what I expected. Thank you very much for your collaboration, you have done a good job. Ha 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 ha. King Sadala was unable to control his emotions, he was convulsing because of the anger he felt. Wretched. Monster. Demon. You have destroyed half the planet, you have finished with millions of people. You have massacred your own race almost to extinction. You have laughed at all of us, you have humiliated us. Only for this. I will not forgive you. I will not forgive you. Because of the extreme anger he felt, King Sadala transformed into Super Saiyan, which surprised his bodyguards. Even Champa and Vados were surprised. Then all the Saiyan are able to do this trick. King Sadala advanced to attack Broly, but Broly, with a smile, waved his little finger, as if he was hitting the air with it, and said, not bad, you have not disappointed me, but the strong people are talking now, don't bother us. When Broly waved his finger, King Sadala felt as if he had been hit by a truck and was rolled back several meters into the air, until a mysterious force grabbed him and his bodyguards, and gagged them. Have I solved your doubts, Vados-chan? Broly said while holding King Sadala and his henchmen. Vados, who watched impassively Broly's malevolent action, asked, yes, you have solved some of my doubts, but I'm afraid I have some more questions. Broly, still transformed into legendary Super Saiyan full power, said cordially, of course. What kind of manly and muscular man would refuse to fulfill such a simple request of a woman as beautiful as you? Vados, accepting the compliment, said with a smile something superb. Oh ho ho. Don't you think you're too young for these phrases? Anyway, I would like to know. Where did you learn that strange ability to manipulate time, and how is it possible that you haven't self-destruct yet? Broly, I'm very sorry, but I cannot answer that. Men have to keep some secrets to look more mysterious and interesting. It is not good to reveal secrets like these before the 3rd date. Vados, not bothering in the least about Broly's refusal, said, Jijoho. If you are already like this at 10, I feel that you will be a lady killer in the future. Oh, she guessed my age included the years I spent in the time chamber. The angels are terrifying. Champa wasn't too surprised by the question about the manipulation of time. That kind of skills were a very delicate subject even for the gods, it was a big taboo, and for that reason they had to dig into that matter. However, he didn't understand what he meant by self-destruction. And since he hadn't been the center of attention for a long time, hey. Vados, what do you mean by self-destruction? He is not in a berserker state, is not there supposed to be no danger now? Vados, without taking off the look of Broly, replied, I'm afraid you're wrong, Champa-sama. It's not a problem of mental state. What causes the explosion is an uncontrolled increase of power that the body is not able to contain. The berserker state is nothing more than the fuel and a secondary effect caused by this increase in power. What worries me is that his body has reached the limit that he is capable of retaining long time ago. It would be normal for him to constantly release his power by means of explosions or energy attacks as in his previous transformation, but he stands before us with complete calmness without releasing energy out of his body, although it should be happening right now. It is extremely strange. Now that you say it, said Champa, who had just realized about that detail. I didn't expect less from an angel, you've noticed right away. But I doubt you'll find the answer, and it's better that you don't for now. In the transformation of legendary Super Saiyan full power, Broly contained in his body all the energy that was previously released in the transformation of legendary Super Saiyan. Thanks to the mutant physic that Broly had, the body to adapt to all that power increased in size once again, and due to the saturation of power, that power manifested as a green energy. Broly's hair, his safety valve, adopted that color due to its saturation. With a multiplier of 24,000 is equal to 2,400*10. However, although that was the limit of his body, it wasn't the limit of his power, which was constantly growing, so he needed to continue to expel energy and more frequently than the other transformations. As the increase was exponential, each time he had to eject in greater quantity and faster, until it would reach a point where it couldn't expel enough power in the required time, dying from self-destruction. However, Broly wasn't expelling energy and destroying everything, because that surplus power was being constantly and instantaneously converted into space in the formless realm. I avoid having to create explosions and forced energy attacks, which are a great disadvantage in a difficult battle. I avoid my self-destruction, I maintain the maximum power that my body allows at all times and increase the space of my formless realm in a constant and unlimited way. I am the genius of efficiency. Vados, after explaining his vision of the problem and observing Broly's facial expression to confirm his hypothesis, asked again, a pity, I was dying of curiosity. My next question is, how did you know we would come and why did you wait for us? Or rather, why did you cause all this for us to come here? That question caused the same reaction as the previous one about pretending to be a berserker. Especially between Champa, Fuwa and Fit, who even felt some fear for what lay behind that question. How could this strange unknown mortal know the god of destruction and his advisor, know that they would come, and their precise moment of arrival? They felt chills. Broly, with a slightly more serious expression, said, It seems impossible to keep secrets from you. This time how did you find out? Vados, satisfied for having guessed right again, said between laughs, I guess it's woman's intuition. Champa, extremely irritated and with the most serious attitude would he had in a millennia, stood in front of Vados and said, Hey Vados. I hope you finished asking your questions, because I'm going to destroy him right now. Broly, without feeling intimidated by Champa's statement, said, Oh, why? If I have been a very good child. Besides, are not you curious to know how I knew you would come? Champa, angrier than before and releasing all his power for anger, I don't care anymore, I'm tired of listening to you. Why do I have to destroy you? Let's see. You are a time bomb that can destroy hundreds of galaxies. You have shown on this planet that you are a dangerous and evil being. In addition, you manipulate time, which in itself is already a serious crime. However, your most serious crime is to manipulate everything to make me come here just when I was eating, and made me bleed more than once. Broly, with the same relaxed attitude as before, said while putting his hands on his back, If I were you I wouldn't do that, you will not get anything good to do it. The god of destruction interpreted those words and gestures as an act of arrogance, acts of arrogance of a mortal towards a god. Champa, so furious that the veins of the front swelled up, he shouted as he put his hand in front of Broly, Shut up. Champa in his hand concentrated a Hakai energy sphere and was about to throw it. He was willing to eliminate Broly, reducing him to dust. But at that moment Broly moved the hand on his back to put it near the Hakai sphere of Champa and said, For your own safety. I wouldn't do that. From the hand of Broly that was right in front of the Hakai, something appeared, something round and green. At cat. Where I am? What happened to my body? It was a talking head. A bruised head that belonged to a chubby, green person, with white hair and long pointed ears. That head, held by the enormous hand of Broly, a few centimeters away from the Hakai sphere, realized where he was and his situation, said, "Oh, Champa. Stop. Stop please." Champa, who had realized the identity of that head, shouting even more strongly, and withdrawing his hand, "Fuwa. What are you doing here? What happened to you?" Chapter 41, That's Defamation and Slander. A few moments before, Broly with the same relaxed attitude as before said while putting his hands on his back, "If I were you I wouldn't do that, you won't get anything good to do it." It wasn't a gesture of arrogance, at least not at all. It was a totally premeditated act, for which he was preparing long before reaching the planet Sadala. Broly, upon putting his hands on his back, without anyone noticing, one of them disappeared. His hand had been transported to the Formless Realm, but he didn't do it to attack Champa. It was something more intelligent and effective to stop a god of destruction. Sacred World of the Kai. Fuwa and Fit, with their faces full of bruises and scratches from the previous fight, watched the situation on the planet Sadala with the crystal ball. They were astonished and terrified by everything that surrounded Broly, too strong, too smart, too unpredictable, too mysterious, too dangerous. However, they were relieved, because it seemed that Champa, the other most dangerous person in the Universe 6, was willing to do his work. Fit, wiping the sweat off his forehead, said, "I have no idea what's happening, but I'm glad now it's over." Fuwa, without taking his eyes off the crystal ball, said, "Yes, I'm not too sure either, but it's a relief." Further, at that moment, without either of them noticing, a huge hand appeared in the sky just above Fuwa's head. Broly days before had visited the sacred world of the Kai. In that place Broly toured, trolled the Kais, but above all he created an ambassadorship of his formless realm that covered the entire planet. The ambassadorships are fragmentations of the N and therefore of the formless realm in a specific place. Inside the ambassadorships, Broly was able to monitor everything, as well as use all the powers that formless realm has in that location, even if he is not in that place. In short, Broly was spying on them all the time. Among other things, Broly's plan was to use the elite of Universe 6 to awaken his legendary Super Saiyan powers. He knew that if he were to awaken his powers, his intense energy could be felt throughout the universe, even in the sacred world of the Kai, just as it happened in Dragon Ball Z in the battle against Majin Buu. Therefore the Kais wouldn't entice him. If he showed them that was somebody powerful and dangerous to the universe, pretending to be a maniac without control with strange power that made disappear all around him and at the same time a time bomb that can destroy galaxies, they would call Champa to take care of him. The combat against Hit would probably allow him to reach the state of legendary Super Saiyan, but not the legendary Super Saiyan full power, so he needed the help of someone stronger than him, and that someone couldn't be other than the god of destruction of that universe. Broly could hear the conversation of the Kais calling Champa thanks to his ambassadorships, as well he heard the answer of Vados explaining the approximate time when they would reach the planet Sadala. He just had to make time until then. However, it was very likely that at some point in the fight Champa would use his Hakai or simply overcome him. That is why he had prepared the best possible hostage. The Supreme Kai, whose life was linked to the god of destruction. If the Supreme Kai died, he too. Further, finally, he does something useful, that scandalous fucking, lazy and idiotic F. At that precise moment Broly's hand, which had been teleported to the ambassadorship, grabbed Fuwa's head and due to the difference in power, he absorbed him instantaneously into formless realm, without being able to finish the sentence. Fit was looking forward to what would be the next insult, and surprised by the silence looked for Fuwa. "Supreme Kai, what are you going to say about?" "Hey! Supreme Kai! Where are you?" he said, trying to find him around. Fit tried to find him, but he didn't know where he had gone, especially in such a delicate moment. "Are you trying to get away from work?" However, his search wouldn't last long, because seconds later, a very familiar voice emerged from the crystal ball. "At Cat. Eh? Where I am? What happened to my body? Oh. Champa. Stop. Stop please." Fit saw with bewilderment and with his eyes out of their sockets, as in the crystal ball appeared Fuwa, or rather, his head. "Supreme Kai, how did you get to that place and what happened to your head?" shouted Fit, who was about to faint. "Nowadays. Fuwa. What are you doing here? What happened to you?" Champa shouted, terrified and pushing away the Hakai sphere from Fuwa's severed head, while King Sadala and his men gagged and immobilized saw the most bizarre thing of the day, and Vados, with extreme seriousness, put himself on guard for the first time. At that moment, while Champa was moving away the most powerful destructive energy in the universe, a finger appeared near that Hakai sphere, and from that finger, a big green energy beam appeared and enveloped the sphere, making it disappear among that green shine. Eh? Champa, who was still terrified by what could have happened, couldn't react to that last attack, so his cold sweat increased again. On the one hand, he was glad he hadn't been hit by that attack, but on the other hand, he was disconcerted by the fact that someone could make his Hakai energy disappear in that way. Vados and Champa looked intensely at Broly and he replied, "That thing was dangerous, I just wanted to make sure it didn't hurt someone." Those words didn't reassure Champa or Vados at all, which looked at Broly as if he were the most dangerous person that ever lived. Champa-sama is in trouble. His magical abilities are extraordinarily disconcerting. I had never seen or heard of something similar. When has he kidnapped Supreme Kai? A few moments ago I had spoken with him. Champa, watching Fuwa's cut but alive head, full of wounds and bruises, shouted with fear, indignation and impotence. He knows, this damn mortal knows that if Fuwa dies I too. Damn. 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 Demon. Let him go. What have you done to Supreme Kai? How can he stay alive with the head alone? In addition, why have you tortured him in that way? You are evil. A psychopath. Champa shouted, since he didn't know what to do to get out of this dangerous situation. Hey! I didn't hit him, he was like that when I brought him here, said Broly indignantly. Champa, who didn't expect that phrase, which seemed sincere, asked Fuwa, is that true? Fuwa, with enough problems now that he was a talking head, with shame replied, yes, you will see, a few days ago I and Fit had a discussion, one thing led to the other. Yes, yes, a fascinating and beautiful story in which I am not involved at all. I just wanted us to calm down a bit. I didn't come to kill anyone, much less Beerus's brother, I wouldn't want him to be mad at me, he did me a big favor years ago, said Broly, returning Fuwa's head to the formless realm. I have given him to understand that I can dispose of his life whenever I want, so he won't do anything hasty. I have given him to understand that I don't want to do him any harm, so he won't be in too much trouble. I have also called his brother, so he will quickly change the topic of conversation I want. Beerus? Do you know him? Champa shouted once again, which was about to suffer a mental collapse. Vados returned to his usual carefree attitude and happy to know his brother said, I don't know what your relationship with Champa's brother is, but that explains many things. The reason why I cannot find anything about you is because you are a scion of the Universe 7. True. Oh, you've been spying on me. Vados-chan ECCI. Broly said, trying to create a cliché comic gag of anime, it's a joke. I just wanted to call you to have a good fight with Champa and get this transformation. Of course also to greet Beerus's brother and Whis' sister. Champa, with a face of few friends, but holding back because he didn't know what had happened with the Supreme Kai, he said, I don't know how you have come to this universe or what you are looking for. I don't know what your relationship with my brother is, or because he has not destroyed you. But I don't care. You are a danger to this universe and we don't want you here. Broly crossed arms showing some indignation and moral superiority, said, you are very unwelcoming, our universes are supposed to be brothers, don't worry, I was going to leave after greeting. But above all, why am I a danger? I may have caused some other problem, but I don't remember doing anything evil since I got here. At that moment, a great roar sounded next to where the conversation was coming from. It was King Sadala, who was using all his strength to speak, despite being muzzled by Broly. Broly turned to him and said as he stopped his immobilization ups. I had forgotten about you. Do you have something important to contribute to this conversation? King Sadala, who understood that he couldn't defeat him, extremely angry, tried to vent himself with the words, you haven't done anything wrong. You killed hundreds of people when you destroyed a ship of Frost's Peace Corps, and you also killed him, the greatest hero in the universe. You have made disappear more than half of planet Sadala and all its inhabitants on a whim. There is no one left but us. And you dare to say that you haven't done anything wrong? You're a fucking criminal and a psychopath. Champa nodded to everything King Sadala said, he loved that people agreed with him. However, Broly didn't agree with the statements of King Sadala. That's defamation and slander. To begin with, I've never killed anyone in my life. Life is too precious to waste it. The reason why I made almost all the planet disappear was so that there were no collateral victims when Champa came to the planet, and also to look evil for the Kais to call Champa, nothing more. I had planned to return everything to his normal state from the beginning. King Sadala, still transformed into Super Saiyan, stunned by the words of Broly, said as he looked around, which was flooded with green energy, "What? How? So what happened before? I was just trying to make you furious so that you could take out the hidden power that every Saiyan has. Since I came to this planet I have been watching you. I don't like monarchical systems, but I respect you. You have done good management of your people, and when they were in danger you have behaved like a true leader. You are thousands of times better than a certain Saiyan king with a beard in the shape of a cock in my universe. Consider it my payment for all the problems I have caused, so. Congratulations, I Broly the fucking legendary Super Saiyan. I'll name you the first Super Saiyan of the universe 6-inch, said Broly, applauding and materializing a mirror in front of King Sadala. King Sadala, who due to the rage hadn't been aware of his own transformation and looked in the mirror amazed by what he saw, his appearance was similar to that of Broly's previous transformation. What the hell is this? Super Saiyan? Are all Saiyans able to do this? The answer is, yes. When a Saiyan reaches his limit and has a calm heart, having a great moment of anger is able to reach this transformation. For the normal Saiyans, multiply the power by 50, although it has much more potential than this. You will learn about it little by little. King Sadala was perplexed by Broly's explanation. He would never have thought that his race had such a great secret. He had always been extremely proud of being a Saiyan, a pride that could be considered fanaticism, but now, it had become a fucking religious adoration. Who could deny now that the Saiyans were the most powerful race in the universe? Even Vados was surprised to learn about this transformation. It wasn't very normal for a mortal to have such power. Broly sighed, as if he was exhausted from a long day of work, and said, "For now I think it would be better to prove that I wasn't lying. I will return everything to normal." Broly snapped his fingers and almost instantaneously, all the green energy that covered almost the entire planet disappeared. The mountains, trees, rivers, and cities that had disappeared devoured by this green energy resurfaced again. In the same way, all the people who had been devoured appeared unharmed in the same position, as if it hadn't been a second since they disappeared. Nobody understood what had just happened. It seemed a terrifying miracle. I know of another big and muscular man who did something similar, although it was the opposite. Chapter 42, The Legend of the Legendary Super Saiyan. King Sadala, I don't wanna. Eesh. What happened? I'm fine. Where is King Sadala? Said the bodyguard who protected his king from Broly attacks and was absorbed into the formless realm. Our bodies have returned to normal, shouted hundreds of people at once. I thought you were dead. Some friends hugged each other, since they saw themselves disappear moments before. What happened with the battle? Where is that monster? Said some officers that were too committed to their work and obligations. I don't know very well what's happening, but I noticed two great keys not far from here. One of them must be Broly, and the other, looks like King Sadala, but, it's too strong to be him. Enzo said, pointing to the horizon. Staying here will not help. Let's go to that place. Several officers of both armies shouted. I would prefer to go home. They don't pay me enough for this, whispered several people who valued their lives more. Even so, everyone went to the place that Enzo pointed out to find answers to their questions. King Sadala and his bodyguards watched in astonishment around him. The planet had returned to normal, and all the people who had disappeared, returned to where they had been devoured by that energy, and were heading to their direction. Do you believe me now? People of little faith. No one has died, there has been no serious material damage, and there is no danger of self-destruction. Am I still a dangerous monster? Broly said, crossing his arms in indignation and showing off his moral superiority. King Sadala was unable to utter any words. Everything was happening too fast, and everything that happened was too shocking. Vados and Champa were also impressed by the fact that everything returned to normal. They had never seen a skill like this. What the hell is this boy? How is he able to do all this? Champa, no matter how much I hated to admit it, Broly was right. Not counting his ability to slow down time, there was no official reason why the god of destruction shouldn't eliminate him. He hadn't destroyed any planet or killed anyone despite being able to. That wasn't the way of acting of a psychopathic killer. However, he didn't care about the lives of those mortals, he was more worried about another reason. And what have you done with Fua? Where is he? Champa asked a little more calmly for the safety of the Grand Kai, although he was still nervous. Broly had shown that he didn't kill anyone, but, you never know what someone can be capable of when he is cornered. That was the advice that Vados has sent telepathically to Champa. He knows the secret between the god of destruction and the god of creation. Even if he frees him, we don't know when he can kidnap him again. If I'm not mistaken, he did it the moment he put his hands on his back, so he can do it at any moment. It is better not to provoke him. Don't worry, before I go I'll give you the chubby back, have some patience until then. Oh. My fan club comes to see me, said Broly looking at the horizon, from where thousands of people of all races came. King Sadala. Thousands of scions shouted at the same time, happy to see that their beloved king was perfectly, although a little changed, especially his hair. It seems it's not my fan club, said Broly jokingly. Hundreds of scions approached Sadala and asked anxiously, King Sadala. Are you okay? What has happened to you? What has happened to your hair? Is that green giant Broly? King Sadala tried to explain what had happened, why his hair was blonde, why they shouldn't not attack Broly, and who were those two people. If you excuse me. I'll take care of the explanations, Broly, knowing that the explanation was extremely long and complex, and knowing how little patience Champa had, he decided to explain it. In an unconventional way. Papa, by saying those words, in the minds of all living beings on the planet Sadala began to emerge a great torrent and information and images about everything that had happened since the battle began until now, omitting certain details, like sensitive information about the gods. Everyone was shocked, not only by the information, but also by how they got it. This was being the strangest day of everyone's life. What have you done? Asked King Sadala, who was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to so many surprises and broken abilities. Fuck. Do I have to explain everything? I have said some magic words and then everything that has happened until now has appeared in your mind. Use a bit of intuition. I'm not a fucking narrator in an anime, said Broly, who was tired of explaining so much obviousness. After a brief silence in which everyone tried to put their ideas in order. So. Broly is not a bad person. And it's not going to explode either. Said one of the lieutenants of Frost's Peace Corps. What a relief, I thought I had come to die again, they said several people at once, who fell on their knees to the ground. Liar. One of the soldiers of Frost's Peace Corps shouted, becoming the center of attention. If you're such a good person, why did you kill a whole fleet of Peace Corps and attacked Lord Frost from behind? My brother was on that spaceship. You will not cheat on me, monster. He's right. A companion shouted, who also had a friend on that ship. By the way, where is Lord Frost? One of the officers asked, surprised. I don't see it either, said King Sadala, who had also noticed that detail. Broly, tired of the false accusations, said, as I said before. I haven't killed anyone. But since you don't believe me. With a malevolent smile he raised his hand and said, what if we ask to the culprit directly? A head appeared from his hand, but this time it wasn't Fua's. Don't kill me please. Shouted that head in Broly's hand, which was crying in despair. Despite the wounds that this severed head had and his harrowing expression, everyone recognized him immediately, Lord Frost. Frost realized that he wasn't dead, but that he couldn't move, tried to understand his situation. What's wrong? Broly, as if Frost's head were an anti-stress ball, squeezed him hard, making it impossible for him to talk. He could only scream and keep crying. I haven't given you permission to speak, little shit. Be a good cuthead and pretend to be dead, Broly said, squeezing him. What are you doing to our hero? Weren't you supposed to be the good guy? All of Frost's lackeys shouted for the bad treatment that was being given to the hero of the universe. Broly, with a malevolent smile while treating Frost's head like a ball, said. Ha 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 ha. Your hero? Are you sure? I'll let you see to yourselves what kind of person your hero is. Broly investigated Frost's memories, which was very easy due to the great difference of power they both had. It was like opening a bag of potatoes using a shotgun pellet with infinite ammunition. He compiled all the information about what happened in the destruction of the spaceship and all his criminal activities over the years, and in the same way as before, he sent all that information directly to the head of all the people of the planet Sadala. This cannot be true, they said, several people, who were about to faint, were unable to face the truth. But Broly interrupted their trance. Yes, accept it, your hero is a fucking trash. These memories will lead you to all the evidence you need. It's your decision to continue being deceived idiots or not, but don't bother me anymore with this. It was impossible for many to imagine that all this was true. They had fought side by side with Frost in countless battles, they had bled to protect what they believed was fair together, they had idolized him, they considered him the greatest hero in history. However, it turns out that he was the biggest villain and phony that ever existed. Every second that passed more people began to accept the truth, everything fit, everything made sense and the evidence was too solid. One after another they started asking for Frost's head, literally. The situation became so untenable that King Sadala, the strongest among those affected ones, had to establish order. Broly, would you be so kind as to give us Frost to judge him for his crimes? King Sadala said, trying to contain the anger of the crowd. However, Broly put Frost's head back into Formless Realm, since he had other plans for him. I'm sorry, but I'll take Frost, and hit. I caught them, so I kept them. It is not negotiable. It is my commitment for all the good actions that I have done until now. That answer wasn't from anyone's liking, but what could they do? They couldn't force him to turn him in, he was too powerful. Besides, did they have the right to criticize and demand something from the person who had uncovered this great conspiracy that had killed millions of innocents? Did the Scions have the right to demand something from the person who had shown them that wonderful transformation? King Sadala, who on the one hand didn't dislike the idea of Broly kidnapping the two strongest people in the universe, because he would become the #1 now he can transform in Super Saiyan, asked to pretend concern, at least, could you tell me what you're doing with them? Broly with an evil laugh replied, he, it's a secret. I don't care what you do with that Frost trash. Finish with this of a fucking time, I'm tired of waiting. Champa shouted from a corner, was about to explode for the time he had that he was waiting. Broly scratching his head, walked away from King Sadala and the rest and said, now if you excuse me, I have a stressed god of destruction to attend, it is better not to make him angry. Broly approached Champa and Vados who were a few meters away, with Fuwa's head in his big hand. It's a pity that our relationship didn't start in the best way, but I hope we're good friends in the near future. Friends? Fuck you. You've already made me lose too much time, give me Fuwa and get out. Champa shouted, resisting the urge not to kill him. Don't be so grumpy, as compensation I'll give you some good dishes that can only be found in Universe 7. Food that not even your brother has been able to eat. The best food that exists. Are you interested? Broly said with the face of a malevolent fox. Champa, who was a glutton and was always competing with his brother, looked kindly on this offer. Well, if the food is delicious, maybe I'll think about it. Broly smiled mischievously, okay, done deal. Catch it. Saying that, Broly threw Fuwa's head into the air, which was getting dizzy from the turns. Help. Fuwa. Vados and especially Champa were surprised by the sudden action of Broly, but they didn't take their eyes off the flying head. Champa fearing that something serious could happen to him, fearing for his own life. When he was about to grab him, Fuwa's whole body appeared, which crushed Champa, who only wanted to grab a head, and they fell. At that moment, many bags full of food appeared near Vados, which she grabbed easily, but something else had appeared behind her. It was Broly's hands, they were approaching his head quickly and stealthily. But before he could get close, Vados dodged his movements perfectly thanks to perfectly mastering the Magat no Goki, like the rest of the angels. Shit. I failed. It's been a very good distraction. You have waited for the moment of greater relaxation for both, distracted us with the head of Fuwa, made food appear near me so my hands were occupied, neutralized Champa using Fuwa, and then you have used your strange ability to teleport your hands to touch my. But why were you trying to touch my head? Vados said with all the bags of food in his hands with an inquisitory look. It wasn't thing. Once Wish told me I would be unable to touch even a hair on your head, so I wanted to try. He didn't lie to me. Ha ha ha. Broly said trying to make an excuse that seemed credible. Broly. Damned. I'm going to destroy you. Champa shouted, who was under Fuwa and threw him to chase after Broly. Well, now I'm leaving. Don't worry, we will see each other again in the future. Ha 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 ha, said Broly addressing King Sadala, Vados, and all the others, who watched with the idiot faces everything that happened. That's why I've bothered so much to clean my name and make a good reputation in this universe. King Sadala, who was still overwhelmed by all that strange boy of only 10 years had done and what he was capable of, he could only ask unconsciously, Broly. What are you? Broly teletransplaning from one side to another away from Champa. What am I? I'm Broly, the fucking legendary Super Saiyan. He said in a badass way before disappearing completely. And don't return. Bastard. I will find you and destroy you, and if my brother has had something to do with this, he will regret too. Champa shouted to the air with his fist held high. After reassuring himself, he went to check the condition of the shocked Fuwa and said, Fuwa, by the way, what happened to your patera? And that's how the acts of Broly, that mysterious Saiyan child of mysterious origin, forever changed the lives of all the people of the Universe 6. The Saiyan that defeated the most powerful armies of the universe by itself. He's Saiyan who defeated Hit, the legendary hitman. The Saiyan that uncovered and defeated the greatest criminal in history, returning the peace to all corners of the universe. The kindly Saiyan, but something bastard, who beat everyone without killing them. The Saiyan that initiated the golden age of the planet Sadala as maximum defenders of the universe. The Saiyan of unlimited power that even the gods feared. There was practically not a single place where what happened that day wasn't explained. Soon his exploits became stories, stories that changed depending on where and who told them, stories that seemed exaggerated, but that didn't even get close to what really happened that day. With the passage of time, those stories became a legend. The legend of Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan. Formless Realm. Broly still transformed into legendary Super Saiyan full power, he was floating in his formless realm, contemplating the 7 Super Dragon Balls. Beside him were Hit and Frost. Behind him were fragments of purple hair mixed with some blood and on top, a sphere of Hakai energy. Blood he extracted from Fuwa's wounds and his patera earrings, which he stole before returning him to Champa. Everything in time stopped, staying the equal as in the moment they entered, without moving, without changing or degrading, without existing. It was a shame not to be able to get a hair of an angel, the most powerful race of the 12 universes. But, other than that, I have achieved all my purposes in Universe 6 for now. Partly thanks to Frost. It seems ironic that it was another Frost demon that caused the awakening of a Super Saiyan. ABD Champa has done very well too. I only needed one attempt to absorb his Hakai. And I didn't even need to use the Dragon Balls, ha 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 ha. Perfect. Let the next phase of my plan begin. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.